Hi, everyone, and welcome to Hudson Institute. I'm Olivia Enos, a senior fellow here at Hudson, where I cover human rights issues in Asia, and it is truly my delight today to convene this event on setting political prisoners free. All across China, the CCP has taken Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, Tibetans, Christians, Falun Gong, dissidents, human rights lawyers, and activists as political prisoners, locking them up behind bars, hoping that their stand for freedom is extinguished and ideally forgotten. Today, we are here to ensure that they are not forgotten and to communicate to the CCP that their efforts to silence individuals like Jimmy Lai, Gulshan Abbas, Pastor Wang Yi, the Panchen Lama, and so many others will not be successful. To the political prisoners who are not here in this room today, we remember you, and we are actively fighting for your freedom. It would be easy to relegate our efforts to secure political prisoners' release to the periphery of US policymaking, but this would be a huge mistake. The CCP's horrific practice of extrajudicially imprisoning people is a tactic central to advancing the party's interests such as maintaining internal stability and safeguarding sovereignty. The CCP uses these faulty justifications to violate the rights of individuals who committed no crimes. They merely took a stand for freedom. It lacks strategy for the US to not do all that it can to free political prisoners across China, and that's why we're here today, to talk about the best ways to do that. Last December, I published a report for Hudson, which perhaps many of you were able to grab on your way in, called A Strategy to Free Political Prisoners in China. The report was a labor of love, born out of years of advocacy where I've worked alongside many individuals who have successfully secured the release of political prisoners, and I know many others, even in this audience here today, who are actively advocating for the release of family members and for other political prisoners across China. In conversation with both government and civil society, I realized that, to be frank, I truly did not understand what we had in terms of tools at our disposal to secure political prisoner release. And frankly, a lot of the folks that I was working with also did not understand that apparatus. So this report identifies many of the tools that do exist, but it also identified areas where the current apparatus is lacking. For example, although the US government has a special envoy for hostage affairs, their primary mandate is to free American hostages, not American political prisoners or foreign political prisoners. And although the SPIHA has at times been successful in securing release, and we're so grateful for that, that is truly outside of their central mandate. The lack of a central apparatus for freeing political prisoners has resulted in a fairly ad hoc process for trying to secure release, which has previously been led by incredible staff members in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Unfortunately, those efforts were only sometimes successful, and in conversations with folks at the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Congress, and civil society, it became clear to me in the process of writing the report that there was a need for an Office of Political Prisoner Advocacy, or the OPPA, spearheaded by a Senate-confirmed individual of ambassador rank to serve as a special envoy for political prisoner advocacy. I had a lot of different things in mind when I thought about the OPPA and the special envoy and the types of activities that they might engage in, and I just wanted to list a few of those activities. For one thing, they could identify the tools and diplomatic levers for securing the release of political prisoners. They can coordinate pressure campaigns with other allies and friends interested in securing political prisoners' release. They can interface with the families and others, equipping those family members of political prisoners with the knowledge they need to be able to press the US government to take action at the right moment in time. They can also identify individuals and entities ripe for sanctioning across the CCP for taking political prisoners. They can facilitate the release of political prisoners at key diplomatic moments. They can liaise with Congress and other members of the executive branch to elevate specific cases. And they can also label individuals as priority cases by bestowing a designation that doesn't currently exist under the US system of being arbitrarily detained. Additionally, they can identify ways to shift risk in negotiations with the CCP, ideally raising issues of political prisoners in every single negotiation between the US and China. And also they can facilitate political prisoners' resettlement in the US or in a third country, an essential element to a successful political prisoner advocacy apparatus. There are many other recommendations that I highlighted in the report, so I hope you all will have the chance to read that report in full. But I truly think that the activities that Congress and the executive branch could do that would be the best would be to actually create this Office of Political Prisoner Advocacy and to appoint a special envoy. I really believe it has the potential to elevate political prisoner cases in overall bilateral negotiations with China. I would be remiss, however, if I did not acknowledge the current context in which we are operating. The landscape for human rights work has shifted substantially even since I wrote this report in December, as the administration has taken steps to reduce capable staff at the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, proposed cuts to grants that would hamstring, if not outright eliminate, many of the groups that are helping to secure the release of political prisoners, and severely undermining the refugee system that is absolutely essential to offering safe haven to political prisoners after their release. The administration has, however, indicated that securing the release of political prisoners is going to be a priority for its re-envisioned DRL. But it's honestly very hard to secure political prisoner release without an adequate system for ensuring their safe resettlement in the US or in third countries. For sure, our refugee resettlement program is in need of reform, but with fewer tools at our disposal to secure swift, securely vetted, and permanent resettlement, it is a difficult priority to fully carry out. As a final note, before I turn it over to our wonderful panelists, I wanted to say something to those of us who are working in civil society and working on human rights across China at this present political moment. I like to think of work in general as very seasonal, and when I was thinking about this particular season, the idea that came to mind was that of a farmer. Please, promise, stay with me here. A farmer has some seasons where they are planting seeds for future crops. Some seasons where the farmer is watering, tending to, and fertilizing those seeds, and others where the harvest is plentiful and ready to be reaped. The farmer is never guaranteed a healthy crop, but if the farmer doesn't plant the seeds in the first place, they aren't guaranteed the crop at all. I truly believe that our field is in the seed planting and the tending phase. And although some of the crops that we've previously worked on have been pulled up, we can diligently replant, diligently water, and diligently tend to the seeds that we're currently planting. And even though we're not guaranteed a crop, without faithful planting and tending to, it is virtual certainty that there will be no fruit. So we have a need to continue to maintain very serious conversations about how best to serve those like Gulshan Abbas, those like Jimmy Lai, those like Ilham Tohti, those like Pastor Wang Yi, the Panchen Lama, and so many others who are in need of our deep and serious and abiding advocacy, and we must continue the practice of faithfully planting. Okay, so without further ado, I'm finally going to introduce our panelists. I'll introduce you all one at a time, and then we'll go down the line in terms of speakers. I'm so delighted to have just a wonderful group of panelists here today to discuss what I think is a critically essential issue of securing political prisoner release. And the first person we have joining us is my friend Corey Jackson, who is the founder and president of the Luke Alliance, a nonprofit dedicated to the care and global advocacy for Chinese persecuted Christians. Prior to Luke Alliance, he founded and served for 15 years as the senior pastor of Trinity Park Church in Cary, North Carolina, a multicultural church that is home to Christians from over 25 cultural backgrounds. Corey also lived in China from 1998 to 2005, speaks Mandarin, and has served as an advisor for a large urban house church movement in China for the past 13 years. He's been instrumental in advocating at the highest levels of Washington and globally for arrested Chinese house church leaders, their families, and for others in China experiencing persecution. He remains deeply connected to the unregistered church movement in China and to constituents in DC and in Europe. He's originally from Birmingham, Alabama, and received his BA from Auburn University and a Master of Divinity from Reformed Theological Seminary in Orlando. He's been quoted as a human rights advocate by Real Clear Politics, and his pastoral articles have been highlighted by the Gospel Coalition and published in Christianity Today. So without further ado, Corey, I'm going to hand it over to you to kick off the panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Hudson, for having me here today. I also want to thank Sarah, who's sitting to my left here. Sarah was the first person to invite me into the White House back in 2018 when Wang Yi, Zhang Rong, and the pogrom against Early Rain Covenant Church happened in Chengdu back on December the 9th of 2018. She and her team invited me in and got me connected with Sam Brownback and others at the State Department, and we were able to successfully negotiate the release of Zhang Rong about 7 months later, and I now have the privilege of speaking on behalf of her and her family and Wang Yi. Before I tell you more about Wang Yi, I want to go back to an IRF secretariat, which I attended in Prague in December of 2023. At that summit, Lord Alton from the UK, who has had an outsized impact on the global movement to highlight prisoners of conscience, made a statement that I have not forgotten. Mind you, this was a global secretariat, not focused on China, but Lord Alton said there, and I quote, "No other regime threatens us," and by us he means the world, "like the CCP." And if that statement was true in December of 23, it is still even and more true today. I met Wang Yi back in 2017 in Hong Kong, and I know Zhang Rong well. My wife knows her very well. As Olivia said, I serve as the strategic advisor for a very large house church movement in China, about 5,000 pastors in 190 cities, and I'm connected to them on a regular basis, and they give me information about what's happening with them and their network that is given to us, so we are able to provide data for the government about Christians and the ongoing and increasing persecution happening under Xi Jinping. Pastor Wang Yi, if you're not aware, is maybe the most well-known pastor in China. If you Google Pastor China, he will likely be your first hit. He was known before he was arrested, but he's definitely known now for what he and his church have been through. Upon his imprisonment in 2018, Wang Yi had a statement prepared to be posted online if he was ever jailed for more than 48 hours. And his statement is called "My Declaration of Faithful Disobedience," which within the first 3 months after being posted was read by 250,000 people in 100 countries. Before Wang Yi was a pastor, he was a human rights defender. He knows Chinese constitutional law very well. And as a pastor, he utilizes scripture to speak directly about the pains that are undergoing the people of China underneath the oppression of the CCP. He was also one of 10 men who visited George W. Bush in the White House in 2006 from China. Wang Yi went on, as I've mentioned, to become the pastor of this church in Southwest China, and that church grew to about 800 people, which is a very large so-called house church in China. They had a school and a seminary attached. And because of Wang Yi's intellectual and outspoken leadership, he has been compared to Dr. Martin Luther King. Some have called him the Dr. King of China because of his unique ability to take scripture and apply it articulately and pointedly in ways that cut across the brokenness of society. On December the 9th, as I mentioned, the CCP launched this attack on Early Rain Covenant Church, arresting over 100 people. Wives were separated from husbands, moms separated from nursing babies. All the pastors, elders, deacons, staff were arrested. 38 men and women were placed in criminal detention. Of those 38, many were tortured, stripped naked, forced to do demeaning things like hop around like frogs. Drugs were used to experiment on them. We know this because we've been able to now talk to them, or we know those who've been able to offer PTSD counseling to them. Other types of psychological torture were used. Wang Yi was charged with subverting state power and illegal business operations. He was sentenced in a secret trial to 9 years. The UN swiftly condemned this, declaring his charges as arbitrary and detention as arbitrary. He's now served 6.5 years of that sentence. As I mentioned, Zhang Rong, his wife, was also arrested at the time in an unprecedented fashion, charged with the same crimes as her husband, simply for being married to him. And thank God, through the work of the White House and the State Department, we were able to see those charges dropped. So Zhang Rong now, an update, she's only been able to visit him 4 times in the last 6.5 years. There was a period of time when she could not see him for 3 years, and she feared that he might be dead. And so we were able to work, again, with the State Department to finally, early on in January of this year, get a visit for her and his parents to visit him, which was much appreciated. Also recently, we were able to make sure that his son could see him for the first time in 6.5 years, which is incredibly encouraging. However, since December the 9th, 2018, Wang Yi has lost over 50 pounds. Zhang Rong reports that he looks bad and is, quote, uglier, darker, and older than before. And her description conveys the possibility of medical torture or forced labor. She's only been able to talk to him on the phone 2 times in this entire period of time for very short times. And her last phone call with him was nearly 5 years ago, where I've learned that on that call she started to read scripture, but a voice came on the line telling her that she could not read, quote, foreign material on the phone. She has stopped getting regular letters from Wang Yi, and our heart breaks for the son, Shu Ya, who has only seen his dad once in the last almost 7 years. So what do we hope for here? We believe that in the midst of this great question of how to engage China, to again quote Lord Alton, that the CCP are serial human rights abusers. And in Wang Yi and in those who else are also represented here today, we have the opportunity. We can't help everyone. We want to, surely, but we believe we can help these prisoners of conscience who are really being targeted by the CCP, and we will not stand idly by. And so we are calling for Wang Yi's immediate release from prison and for the U.S. government to continue, as they have since 2018, and should continue today, to not let up the pressure, but to continue to focus on the release of Wang Yi from prison. We also are calling for regular family visits, better treatment, better medical attention, access to a Bible. What I'm asking for from you today, if I may be so bold, is to remember Wang Yi, remember that he represents the 80 to 100 million Christians in China. That's roughly 7 or 8% of the Chinese population who gathers every Sunday morning to worship God and to experience and utilize their freedom of religion. We ask you to use your ability, whether you're civil society or government, to come alongside the U.S. State Department and others in the U.S. government, as Olivia said, to continue to call them out, to apply the appropriate pressure, and some of the ways that Olivia has described would be tremendous. And I'm calling on this White House to engage with China on their human rights record, as was happening in the first Trump administration and has been promised several times in speeches from the White House, that the securing of political prisoners and their release is going to be a priority in this administration. Final comment is, you may wonder why Wang Yi and so many Christians in China are willing to suffer for their faith. They're simply following the Lord Jesus, the one I serve, who, though he came to speak truth and do good, truth and goodness that the world needed to experience, he was also hated by political authorities. They perceived Jesus to be subverting state power too, but they didn't understand that he was preaching about a kingdom that is not of this world. Wang Yi is following the Lord Jesus under the repression of the PRC, a regime that looks much like the Rome of Jesus' day, who assumes that they are in charge of and controlling every corner of life in their country. But Jesus and Wang Yi know that there is a great percentage of life in this world that is meant to be free of government control, where we have freedom of faith and belief to worship whomever we choose as human beings. I'll close there.
Yeah, that's a really great note to end on. Thank you, Corey. And also thank you for highlighting Pastor Wang's, remind me the exact title of the statement that he released when
my statement of faithful disobedience.
I cannot commend that to like everyone in this audience more. It is such a beautiful statement, and I think it's a reminder that there are so many folks who, even though they're beaten down, even though they're downtrodden, even though they're in political imprisonment, they are still empowered and they are still speaking truth.
That's right.
And so I think it's incredibly powerful that he put out that statement. And it is very similar, if I remember, to like Martin Luther King Jr.'s like letters from a Birmingham jail type of thing.
It does read that way.
It has a lot of like, yeah, it's very reminiscent of that. So thank you for highlighting that and so many other themes in your remarks. I'm so excited to turn it over to Sarah Macon. I'm going to fully introduce you, but I just wanted to say, like, in the first Trump term, Sarah was just an invaluable resource to so many of us, I'm sure, here in the audience and beyond, in highlighting and advancing human rights across China, but also in a lot of other issues. And so that work is just so deeply appreciated. Sarah is a human rights advocate, a filmmaker, and a former U.S. government official with deep expertise in national security policy and international religious freedom. She served in the first Trump administration as Deputy Assistant to the President, Senior Director on the National Security Council, and the President's Senior Advisor on International Religious Freedom. Prior to that post, Sarah served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Director of Strategic Outreach, Public Liaison, and Intergovernmental Affairs to Vice President Mike Pence. Sarah currently operates her own strategic consulting firm in Washington, D.C., and is a producer of A Faith Under Siege, a documentary highlighting the persecution of Christians in Russian-occupied Ukraine. Her work is dedicated to advancing human rights, defending religious minorities, and countering authoritarian repression. She collaborates regularly with international partners, civil society leaders, and faith communities to promote religious freedom and democratic resilience worldwide. Sarah, excited to hear from you and all that you have to say on this topic.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I'm not a public speaker. I've spent my majority of my professional career as behind the scenes as possible. So you'll have to forgive me if I ramble or get off topic. I'll try not to. And Corey, thank you for your kind words. I was blessed with an opportunity in the White House that I want to credit the President and then Vice President Pence for trusting me with. There were certain roles that when you were given a certain kind of title, it allowed you to kind of circumvent bureaucracy and really get things done. And once I learned that I could do that, I guess I was doing it a lot and hoping that we could make some change. And so I'm grateful that I was able to help you there.
Thank you.
A lot of the first few years were spent on, for me at least, American citizens that were unfairly detained or imprisoned abroad. And I credit Fred and Cindy Warmbier, who became dear friends of mine, and Andrew and Noreen Brunson for really opening my eyes to how some of this works and what our processes are. And there were so many others, but those were American citizens. It became clear to me that there were other people that were imprisoned that as the United States we needed to be aware of and care about in the same way. I happen to be a person of faith. I am a Christian. And to me there is, our calling is to love. And that's very clear. And so that doesn't just stop at Americans. We're called to love everybody. And so Proverbs 31:8, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, was something that I would just try to remember every day. And knew that, again, the line wasn't just at American citizens, but we could do more for others. I also noticed in my time there that people of faith who spoke up for those who were being persecuted, whether they were of their own faith or other faiths, that really moved the needle. And so I still really encourage organizations that are faith-based, whatever that faith might be, to stand up for each other. If one faith is threatened, we're all threatened. And there is, I think, no greater voice than those who can speak up for each other. But today I work on a number of different things, but one of the cases I spend a lot of my personal time on is with my friend Ziba, advocating for the release of her mother from China. And, I have been juggling this for so long, trying to figure out how best to explain to the administration and folks that, yes, Dr. Gulshan Abbas may not be an American citizen, but her family is. And what China has done with her is an example of transnational repression. And the impact that that has had on an American family and how China has used that to influence the Uyghur advocacy community is not something we should tolerate. And so as time goes by, I think we start laying that kind of foundation. And to Olivia's point, you plant those seeds, and at some point, they're gonna sprout, they're gonna take root. And I am so grateful for the positive feedback we've gotten from SPIHA and from others in state and elsewhere, saying this is, top of our list, we're gonna work on it. And I think the thing that I can maybe add or encourage you most with today is to look at this all through the lens of who sits in the Oval Office right now and how he negotiates. And if you haven't read his Art of the Deal book, I encourage you to read it, or at least get like the Cliff's Notes versions, which I'm gonna try and give you now, because I want us to think about how we can advocate best for these political prisoners through a lens that will speak to a man who is quite good at negotiating. And regardless of your opinions of him, it is a fact. And so, well, I believe it's a fact. He thinks big, so we should think big. He maximizes leverage in every deal, so we need to give him leverage. We need to provide that to him and explain to him why it is in the U.S.'s benefit to advocate for these political prisoners. He's aggressive, but he's strategic. I think we need to do the same. He always knows and studies his market, and he does his homework. And I think we need to do the same. And as it relates to China, recognizing that market and who they are and who they're speaking to and how they do it, again, that's how we have to frame things for him to help make him successful. So again, just kind of looking at it through that lens, I think is important and will help us be successful. He thinks big and he lives large. I do believe he lives by the idea that sometimes you lose a battle, but you'll find a new way to win the war. And again, I think that's how we need to speak about some of these things. So again, I just encourage you to read that if you want to better understand how to maybe be a better advocate in this administration with this president. And I do just want to close on Dr. Abbas's case and why I'm so heavily invested in that. Not only has Ziba become a dear friend, and I love her dearly as a sister, but again, this is a very clear example of transnational repression. And we need, as a community, and I'm finding ways all the time to help Ziba do this, we need to really pose a reputational cost to the CCP on this. The direct consequence that they are having on an American family is unacceptable. I think we need to find ways to help scare them into having an internal conversation about what to do with her. And I believe it's a deliverable that can be done. I believe it will be done. That we can reunite a family, and that, the president has said that this is a priority to reunite families and bring people home. And I believe we can accomplish that in this administration. It's just a matter of making our voices loud enough. And I also think we just need to remember all the time that part of our job is to be an irritant to them. The more we irritate them, the more they want things to go away. And so however you find to do that, I think is important. And I hope that before the president agrees to meet with Xi, that they receive something in good faith. And if that's a release of Dr. Abbas, that would be beautiful. So I am prayerful about it. I believe it will happen. I trust this administration. I know that they are smart. I know that there are many good people there who have the right intentions. And I would just ask that if you're a person of faith, whatever your faith is, pray for those that we're talking about today, and keep them in your thoughts all the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Olivia.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that, and especially for highlighting Gulshan Abbas's case. I can't wait until the day that Ziba can hug her mom, and that, for so many Uyghurs, for so many Hong Kongers too, for everyone, that we could see days where people's lives are changed fundamentally. Being able to see your family member again, being reunited, that's a life changed completely. So that's why this work is just so important. So thank you for highlighting that, and for ways that we can be thinking creatively about engaging during this administration's tenure too. So I appreciate that so much. Johar, I'm going to introduce you and then turn it over to you. Johar Ilham is an author of 2 books and an advocate for the Uyghur community and her imprisoned father, Uyghur economist Ilham Tohti. She works at the Worker Rights Consortium as a forced labor project coordinator and serves as a spokesperson for the coalition to end forced labor in the Uyghur region. And Johar, as we were talking earlier, I realized, man, I'm going to have you back to the Hudson stage, not just to discuss political prisoners, but also to discuss the forced labor issue, which is so critical and important too. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to see many of your faces. I've seen a lot of you for the past 12 years, and thank you for fighting beside me and never stopping. And also thank you, Olivia, for inviting us and for giving me this opportunity to see everyone in person. As I mentioned, I arrived in this country about 12 years ago at the age of 18, knowing no English, having no plans, understanding almost nothing about human rights advocacy. Even the term 人权, which means human rights in Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, was so abstract to me, nor did I have any vision or what I would be doing all alone in this foreign country. My father and I were forcibly separated at the Beijing International Airport in 2013. I was supposed to only be here for 2 weeks, and my father was supposed to be the one that's teach in the US as a visiting scholar. The Chinese authorities prevented my father, Ilham Tohti, an Uyghur economist, from boarding the plane, and soon after he was sentenced to life imprisonment for the alleged crime of separatism. The Chinese government accused my father of being an extremist, an advocate of violence, a common description that the Chinese government likes to use to label all Uyghur political prisoners. My father has never incited violence nor promoted separatism, as the Chinese government claims. He's a renowned scholar who dedicated his life and work to brokering peaceful dialogue among Uyghurs and Han people. He was well loved by his colleagues and his students. That is why his arrest generated such an outcry for not only the international community, but also from many inside of China. On his website, uygurbiz.com, he hosted articles that evaluated the disparities in the Uyghur region and opportunities, or lack thereof, for economic growth and development. He proposed constructive solutions to the Chinese government in efforts to develop the Uyghur region. My father believed that if you analyzed problems thoroughly, meaningful solutions would follow. Instead of engaging in constructive dialogue, the Chinese government locked him up. My father was sentenced in September 2014. While in prison, he has been shackled, tortured, denied food twice, each time for 10 days. And he lost over 40 pounds in the first couple of months of his detention. And those are only the times that we're aware of. He has not seen a lawyer since his second trial in 2014. My family has not been able to visit him since 2017. Now I do not know whether he is alive. It is abundantly clear that there's no due process in China, not for the Uyghurs, not for the Han Chinese, not for anyone. Instead of engaging in, this is also the case for many, many other Uyghurs, not only for my father's case, who are being held captive by the Chinese government. A number of them were scholars like my father, and some were my father's students. Rahila Dawood, a well-respected anthropologist who never stopped the work of preserving Uyghur customs and culture, received a life sentence for so-called endangering state security. Atkem Rozi, a brave student of my father who did not back down on doing research and publishing, even when facing Chinese government's constant harassment, was charged with 4 years in prison in 2014, yet her whereabouts remain unknown. Gulshan Abbas, a retired medical doctor who was sentenced to 20 years in prison in retaliation for his sister's human rights advocacy work in the US. Yalqu Rozi, a beloved publicist who documented and published Uyghur literatures and histories and textbooks, was sentenced to 15 years in prison for inciting subversion of state power. Nuralia Yalqun, my dear cousin, who was a kind nurse and the carer of my grandmother, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for so-called non-compliance. What her crime was refusing to turn in her cell phone, and for the Chinese government found a photo and an article of my father in her cell phone. The list just goes on and on and on. I mention these names as examples in addition to my father's because it is important to remember that those in prison unfabricated charges, and the over 1 million Uyghurs and other Turkic and Muslim majority peoples who have been arbitrarily detained in internment camps are not just numbers, but real people who have parents, children, and friends, neighbors, and loved ones. Soon after the Chairman Xi's visit to the Uyghur region in 2014, the Chinese government's new major policy toward Muslim population started the mass arbitrary detention of an estimated 1.8 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic ethnic groups in the Uyghur region, and a crackdown on religious and cultural practices under the guise of a so-called poverty alleviation and de-extremification program. In the years following, the government of China developed a state-sponsored political program consisting of eradication and forced labor as a form of widespread and systemic persecution of Uyghurs and other Turkic and Muslim majority peoples on the basis of our religion and ethnicity. While claiming to cleanse ethnic groups of their extremist thoughts, the program actually sought to erase Uyghur culture and undermine Muslim religious practices and format each individual Uyghur's political ideology in here. This involves multiple forms of involuntary labor at workplaces across the Uyghur region and even in other parts of China that are interwoven increasingly with the global supply chains. The system of forced labor is state-imposed and has been enabled by other egregious human rights violations, such as mass surveillance, arbitrary detention, gender-based violence and harassment, rape, torture, political re-education, and forced sterilization. The birth rate of the Uyghur region dropped nearly 24 to 27% in one single year, and it has been growing negatively since. These abuses are bolstered by a pervasive technology-enabled system of surveillance. This is a time some of you in the audience might be thinking, what can I do to help the Uyghurs? I get asked this question a lot, and while I do not have the perfect answer for this, I'm still trying to figure that answer out. However, we can start with first lifting up the names of individuals who are imprisoned in violation of their basic human rights and draw attention to their individual cases. We need to impress upon people who are unmoved by the Chinese government's pervasive and systematic repression in the Uyghur region that the detention of over 1 million people is not an abstract idea. It is a horrifying reality that is destroying the lives of individuals and families like mine, like Rahila Dawood's, and like Yalqin Rozi's. We can be mindful of where we shop and make sure that our day-to-day expenses, including your grocery shopping list, to the business suits that you're wearing, the business ties, the heels that you're wearing to work, and holiday gifts that we're gifting our loved ones that we purchased are not tainted by Uyghur forced labor. We can call on governments around the world to pass import bans, which can result in lowering the demand of Uyghur forced labor tainted goods. And hopefully, the Chinese government will no longer be able to profit off the sufferings of my people. And I hope one day to be able to step inside a store without having to wonder whether my father or my dear cousin or one of my old neighbors made one of those goods inside those detention camps. And I hope that day comes soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johar. Thank you for offering such practical ways that we can provide support for the Uyghur people. And I just really appreciate you also sharing your own personal experience and the experiences of others, because you're absolutely right. If we do not keep the individuals in clear view as we're thinking about what do we do next, I think then we've lost the plot. So thank you for centering that so clearly and for offering those practical solutions. Thank you.
Olivia, I just want to thank you for bringing up the idea of not purchasing something with a Chinese label. And I want to encourage everybody who does that, also not just to keep it to yourself, but when you're in a store and you look at the label, talk to somebody about why you're making that choice. Share it with somebody. I have had so many open doors and opportunities to tell people about Uyghur forced labor in Home Depot, in Marshalls, in wherever it is. So I just encourage you, like, it is wonderful to do it on your own, but tell people why you're doing it.
That's a great point. Love that. Thank you, Sarah. Last but certainly not least, the ever lovely Frances Hoy. Frances Hoy and I also had the opportunity to work together at the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation for a while. She is the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation, based here in Washington, D.C., where she leads both research and advocacy on Hong Kong and China, focusing on political prisoners, the rule of law, and human rights. She began her activism at 14 as a standing committee member of Scholarism and later helped organize global solidarity efforts during the 2019 and 2020 protests. Following the imposition of the national security law in 2020, she sought and was granted asylum in the United States, becoming the first Hong Kong activist to receive asylum here. In December 2023, the Hong Kong authorities placed a Hong Kong $1 million bounty on her, accusing her of quote-unquote colluding with foreign forces under the national security law. Frances, we're really happy to have you here today to speak about political prisoners and the situation in Hong Kong.
Thank you, Olivia, and thanks to Hudson Institute for convening this conversation. I've heard Zhuhe's story so many times, and I think every time I hear it, it still shakes me to hear about how people's life can be impacted forever because of these things. And it happens to so many more people, Hong Kongers, Tibetans, Uyghurs, Chinese Christians. Everyone who is prosecuted under the CCP suffer from this. And so I think that's the reason why we're here, to think about the ways that we can advocate for them. As you mentioned about the bounty, I think it's also correlated to what happens to the political prisoners in Hong Kong. Their crime is not, my crime is colluding with foreign forces. But what I actually did is to stand on stages like this to talk about the situation in Hong Kong, to fight for freedom in Hong Kong and my friends, the freedom of my friends. And for that, I was labeled as colluding with foreign forces. And many of my friends, because of their fight for democracy, they're being labeled as, subversion, inciting secession, all these type of different crimes. They're not criminals. I'm not criminal. They're fighting for the values that we stand for, and that's why we're here. And I wanted to, echo your recommendation, very central to, our advocacy, which is to have, a specialized office in the State Department that really focus on coordinating for this type of advocacy. And making sure that we drive outcomes across the US governments. There are so many things that go into these advocacy, like Sarah mentioned. You have to coordinate, for example, with the families, the civil society, congressional members, and the administration. You have to identify diplomatic opportunities to carry that out. So there are so many things that goes into the advocacy that really requires a full-time team to work on these things to make sure that it continues to stay fore and central to our foreign policy. And I wanted to, before I go into the Hong Kong context, I wanted to lay out a little bit of why this topic matters. I think we, to many of the general population, the general public, it's very intuitive and straightforward why we're advocating for wrongfully detained Americans in foreign countries. And many people would ask, why it matters that we are advocating for foreign nationals that doesn't have anything to do with the US. I think the answer is pretty straightforward. Obviously, there's the humanitarian aspect of it, and I think my panelists laid it out very clearly. But I think also there is a matter of principle, right? Like I said, these people, they are locked behind bars for their advocacy for democracy and freedom. These are the things that we stand for: democracy, human rights, and freedom. These are the words that rang in Hong Kong streets during the 2019 protests. These are the reasons why they are now behind bars. And so when these people are being threatened and persecuted because of their activism, we as the leader of the Democratic Front needs to stand up and really speak for those people who are also, standing by these values that we advocate for. And the worst thing that we want them to think is that, the democratic world have abandoned them, right? I think that's what the CCP wants them to think, is that we, put them to the front and betray them. But really, these people are advocating because they long for freedom. They want to have a say in their future, and that's what happened to my friends. And so, that's why we care about these things. And there's also another part of it is that, when a city or a country have so many political prisoners, it tells you a lot about the business environment. The national security law in Hong Kong creates so much business risk for U.S. businesses, and it raises concerns about how we deal with our investments and the supply chain. So there is also this economical aspect of why we care about political prisoners and the transnational repression part of the side of things. I left Hong Kong in 2020 after the pro-democracy movement and the crackdown in Hong Kong. Not only that I left my future, my family behind, I also left many of my friends who were still staying in the battlefield. And many of them are now locked behind bars. They remain to be one of the 1,900 political prisoners that have been, in jail since 2019. Currently, there are still more than 700 of them languishing in jail, including the friends that I mentioned. The growth of population of political prisoners in Hong Kong really put Hong Kong next to a lot of the atrocious regimes in this world. And that's why it become, we're very new to this topic about advocating for political prisoners, securing their release. And so we at CFHK Foundation, this is really front and center of our agenda, is to advocating for their cause and for them to be released and see their families finally. To put faces to the numbers, like Olivia mentioned, there's Jimmy Lai, I think probably the oldest and the most prominent political prisoners amongst all. He is 77 years old, a publisher, the founder of Apple Daily, and a British citizen who has been detained since 2020, which means it's been 5 years. And for the time that his trial has started in 2023, he has been in solitary confinement in a cell that is, in a about 80 square feet large cell every day with no window, right? Little meaningless sunlight that comes into his cell. Spend more than 23 hours every single day with really little physical, opportunity to have physical activities. He is 77 years old, a diabetic person, and his medical condition has been increasingly concerning. The international community have been ringing an alarm on his medical condition. There are multiple times that court has to be dismissed because of that. And so we remain to, raise his profile and hopefully that he could be, released soon. Otherwise, I mean, he's facing life in prison for sure. The chances of him dying in jail is high. And so we really wanted to see him out as soon as possible. Another person, Gwyneth Ho, she is a journalist and one of the candidates of a Democratic primary in 2020, and she was sentenced to 7 years in jail simply for running in that election. My friend Joshua Wong, he inspired generations of people to come out and fight for their freedom and to have a say in their future. He is sentenced to 4 years and 8 months behind bars. And just recently, the Hong Kong government has re-prosecuted him under the national security law in an attempt to continue to keep him behind bars, to prolong his detention. And these are just a few names, right, among the number of 1,900 political prisoners that have been in jail since 2019. And the Hong Kong government currently is isolating every single one of them inside prison, not just from outside support, but even inside prison, they're dispersing the power, the political prisoners in different areas so that they cannot come together or have any conversation. They put political indoctrination program on political prisoners specifically to provide national security education, to provide psychological sessions, to re-engineer their minds, to get them to show remorse to their actions and their advocacy for democracy. And we have been documenting that, and we are actually publishing a new report next Wednesday at our Hong Kong symposium at the Capitol, which we documented a lot of the prison conditions in Hong Kong, not just to the political prisoners, but also to the general prison populations. What's happening in the prison and whether or not Hong Kong is abiding with the international standards. That's what we have been documenting, and we're going to put out the report on Wednesday. So if you're, any one of you is interested, you can come and join us on Wednesday at the Capitol. I would just end this, with a message. I think, like I said, the worst thing that we want political prisoners to think about is that the world has forgotten them. I have heard from friends behind bars telling me that they felt really lonely in this process. And I think the reason behind it is that we're not loud enough. The world doesn't seem to care, and we don't want that to, we don't want them to think that. Obviously, the CCP would want them to think that we have abandoned them. And so, we really need to stay our voices loud, to lift their names up, in every single opportunities, raise their profiles. We can't control what the CCP does every single time, but I think what we can control is that we can change the fates of people who are suffering. We can raise the price for Chinese authorities who is jailing a journalist, right? Jailing students for standing up. We can make it riskier for officers to deny medical care to prisoners. We can make sure a prisoner's name is being raised, is spoken in the side of the ocean, and that's, her name is being raised in every single relevant diplomatic meeting. So yeah, I think this is what we should do all the time, and until the day, all the political prisoners are out, we will not stop.
Yeah. Wow, thank you, Frances. That was a very incredible charge, I think, to all of us to raise our voices, to make sure that political prisoners know they are not forgotten and that we are going to continue to work on their behalf until they can be out and working on others' behalf. Thank you. You made such a compelling case. I don't think I could have said it better myself in terms of why this matters for all of us. And so thank you for offering that reminder very beautifully. We are going to open it up to audience members for Q&A. But before we open it up, I wanted to ask all of the panelists the following question. Some of you guys touched on this to some extent, but if there was one thing that Congress or the executive branch could do today to advance the cause of political prisoners, what would it be and why? I'll start with you, Corey, and we'll go down the row.
That's a good question. I appreciate all the comments from the panelists, and I will just, Olivia, you've researched this much more than I have and thought it through. I love your idea of creating a special position within the State Department to focus on this issue, and I feel like that if we don't set this issue apart and have someone dedicating their time and have an office dedicated to it, I mean, as was said by some of the other panelists, like the work is so great, and as you articulated all your bullet points, the work is so great and so intense just for one prisoner. Yeah. That if we were to actually take up the case of all the political prisoners that really need our attention, it would require just a tremendous amount of effort. And so I do believe, and I hope that all the changes that are happening in state and DRL, that we won't miss this very important issue, which is so important, not just for our country, but it's important for all those who are languishing. And I want us to not speak with our silence, but with our voices, and we have the opportunity to do that, and the way that we very systematically orchestrate things within our government, which I think is important.
Yeah, Sarah?
You know, I think you articulated very well why this is important as a United States government to advocate for them to speak on, for them to lead on. And I would love to see the president and Marco Rubio, Secretary Rubio, and others say that themselves and recognize that and publicly state that we are the United States. This is what we stand for. This is who we are. We are the leaders of this in the world, and we do not accept it from other countries. And that's who we are. I would love to see a public statement like that.
Yeah, that would be great. Zohar.
There are a few things I would suggest to the current administration. I think the U.S. government should continue demanding for meaningful access into the region. I mean, the Chinese government tried inviting global leaders to visit China, visit different parts of China. However, none of these so-called visits are unfettered. None of these are not escorted by Chinese government officials without surveilled. So I think without meaningful access to the region, there will be nothing will be changed. And second of all, like one step at a time. Obviously, we want the release of all the political prisoners. But the first step would be to have proof of life of all these political prisoners who are currently detained. Or we've mentioned a few cases by now. None of us are sure whether any of these political prisoners are alive, what their current conditions are. We're the proof of life, and it should be the proof of life should be very clear and should be at a satisfactory level to meet the family members' demands in the level that meets their demands. And also, I think there could be consideration of political prisoner exchange. There have been successful cases with other countries, between the U.S. and, for example, Russia. And I think that could be one way to bring freedom to some of the political prisoners. There could be other negotiations can be made as well, not just by exchanging prisons, but like exchanging with whether deals or that would be up to the administration to decide. And also, one thing might be a little bit extreme and controversial, which is oftentimes when we propose sanctions for the Chinese government officials, we are sanctioning particular officials who are in charge of the region, but that position can be replaced every other second by the Chairman Xi, and that oftentimes it does not hurt the Chinese government as much. What hurts is the family members, their children who are studying here, who buying houses and assets here, owning bank accounts, and who are purchasing companies, and I think this is what will hurt the Chinese government the most, and that could potentially influence their ideas just by sanctioning their visit to the U.S. It's not oftentimes going to work because according to the Chinese constitutional law, they cannot have private visits to the U.S. anyway. So for them, they're not missing out on anything, and they weren't planning to come to the U.S. at the first place. It's their children, their wives, their family members that are coming here, taking up the resources and receiving the freedom, enjoying the freedom while back home interfering with other people's freedom and their financial status. So yeah, it might sound a little bit controversial and extreme.
I love it.
That's what I think might be the only thing that would work when it comes to impacting Chinese government officials' decisions.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you raised that. To me, that it's not controversial at all. That's not like tough enough, right? But actually, one of the recommendations I made in the report was that one of the things that the Office of Political Prisoner Advocacy would do is produce an annual report that would identify, yes, of course, political prisoners that we need to be paying attention to and trying to secure their release, but also those individuals who are responsible for the imprisonment, responsible for the torture, responsible for all of the horrific things that are going on, and that there would be a reporting requirement on why those individuals have not yet been sanctioned, and that special envoy would be responsible for putting the pressure on educating the higher ups who have the ability to ixnay state and treasury thoughts on who should be designated, and hopefully that would result in additional designations, because the CCP should feel pain. They should feel pain for having taken political prisoners, for having undermined freedom and the livelihoods, and in some cases, taken the lives of individuals who are imprisoned. So, thank
As Sarah
you.
mentioned, we have to be the irritant that they want to get rid of as much. So we cannot stop until they will say, okay, we will release all the prisoners. We will give back the freedom of all the people who deserve to be breathing the fresh air, being reunited with their loved ones, their families, practicing their religion, write the articles and speaking with the journalists as they deserve the freedom of expression.
Yeah, yeah. And I think actually Sophie Richardson has said in the past, we were testifying like earlier this year, and she was saying with other political prisoners, they literally would ask like almost every day for a status update. How is this political prisoner doing? Are they alive? Are they, what's their health like? And just keep doing it because you're an irritant and it's annoying. And I think, Sarah, you were saying that too. We have to be a little thorny and obnoxious almost to like try to get these political prisoners out. Okay, Frances, over to you for your answer.
I would say a few things. I think for this is for the administration, for decision makers, for even businesses, in the U.S. to condition the the health and the freedom of political prisoners in every engagement they can have with the Chinese counterparts. I think that's so important because that shows the other side that we care about this at such a high level that we are not going to have any, to talk anything, to trade, to negotiate anything if we don't have the freedom of political prisoners. That's the first thing. And then I'm going to bring up about the Defending Freedom projects. Olivia brought me to this when we were working together at the CFHK Foundation. There is a project under the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission in the U.S. House of Representatives that allowed members of Congress to adopt a political prisoner. So there have been a lot of Chinese political prisoners have been adopted under that program. I think Jimmy Lai is also one of them. We need more people to be, more political prisoners from Hong Kong, from China to be adopted under that program. What it helps is that the members of Congress who adopted an individual can really own that person, right? Like he can go up to any engagement he can have to really raise the profile of that individual that he adopted. It allows him to, the members of Congress to set up meetings and to have briefings about the updates of that individual. It gives them so many opportunity to basically to pay more attention and raise the profile, to raise the awareness of the political prisoner that they adopted. And I think it's a good opportunity to really clear up some misconception. I think some people in the community or even, some of the family members of the political prisoner, they think that sometimes, if we are being too loud, it might jeopardize the safety of the political prisoner, thinking that, because that might show that they have a relationship with foreign governments. But I think people think that, because I guess myself as a Hong Konger, I've seen, how the CCP is really rooting out every dissident's voices, and they're really aggressive on Hong Kongers, especially with our engagement with foreign governments. And so a lot of us are scared by having that sort of voices from the outside world to on the specific political prisoners because it feels like that they have a relationship. But when I pull myself out from that Hong Konger, viewpoint, and I look at the facts and the past experiences that all of you have established, is that the louder the voices the louder we are, the more chances we can get get better treatment for the political prisoners, because the Chinese government truly can see that we care about them. Sometimes I don't think that this applies to every political prisoners, but sometimes the higher profile political prisoners actually do get better treatment compared to those who are not named, who doesn't have a public profile. And those are the people that we wanted to mention all the time, and they're not numbers, they are, real human being behind that. And so, whatever ways we can to raise their profile, to name their names are important, is helpful. And then I think the last thing, just very quickly, we talk a lot about the efficacy for securing the release of political prisoners. But I think what is least discussed is what happened after their release, whether they can have a safety footing somewhere else in a democratic country. It doesn't have to be in the US, it can be anywhere around the world that they can finally feel free to speak, right? Speak up. Not everyone wants to leave, but I think when people want to, we should provide that opportunity. We should lay out the groundwork, a humanitarian pathway for these people to really seek for safe haven somewhere else. It doesn't have to be a permanent residency in the US, but at least having an opportunity for them to come here and kickstart their life and to figure it out there. What really would even be better is, when the person being released and they are able to come to the US or anywhere around the world, and they decide to take a step up to advocate for their case and the cases of their friends, that's even better. Those people have great story to tell, and they have experience and the knowledge dealing with the Chinese government. They can help us to understand the Chinese Communist Party. That's a great asset to the democratic world, to be able to have the stories of these people to be told, right, to the world. So I think while we talk about the advocacy to get prisoners out, we also need to think about how we can make sure that they continue to be safe and that they can continue to practice their freedom after they're released.
Oh my goodness, so many good points there. I wanted to add just very briefly onto the ability for members of Congress to adopt a political prisoner. This is an incredibly powerful tool, but the Defending Freedoms Project isn't only limited to members of Congress. Actually, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom also, their commissioners and chairs are also able to adopt political prisoners, and they have been able to successfully secure the release of political prisoners as well. So I feel like this is such a good reminder that there's so much that we can do regardless of whether we're in like pseudo civil society roles, pure civil society roles, or a member of Congress, to be able to like raise their voice and elevate these issues is just so incredibly important. And Francis, I also really appreciate it. Oh, and one other thing on the congressional side, I have heard from folks like who have worked on these issues that one of the most successful things that a member of Congress can do is actually to hold a hearing where they call somebody from the administration who's responsible for trying to secure the political prisoner release down to the Hill to talk about what have you done, what have you not done, what can be done to secure the release, because it really elevates the profile of the issue. So I think, if you had more members of Congress aware that they can adopt these political prisoners, aware that they have the power to hold a hearing and that they can really change somebody's life, I think educating them on that is incredibly, incredibly helpful. And Francis, I also wanted to add one other thing. I so appreciated that you talked about the types of things that you can do short of securing a political prisoner's release, because part of our work is not, ideally we get everybody out and they're free, but it's also trying to make their life better while they are behind bars. And I remember one thing that was done by CFHK actually while I was still working there was a group of students from a local Catholic school who wrote letters to Jimmy on postcards that he had done religious art while he's Catholic, and he had done some religious art of, I think it was Jesus, right? And had put Jesus on the cross and had like this beautiful postcard, and the students just wrote to him to encourage him. Now, we don't know whether or not those letters, I think, made it to him. Probably they didn't, but these are good things that we can be thinking about for other political prisoners. Can we write to them? Can we encourage them? Can we remind them that they're not forgotten? Because there is this in-between time between total freedom and just being behind bars and languishing, where we might have opportunities to offer hope and encouragement that they're seen, known, and remembered.
Can I bring up just one thing? This is a great point to show individual support, to really these are lifeline, I think, for political prisoners to see the letters from a stranger and to feel that the world hasn't forgotten them. I think that's so important. And then another thing that the U.S. or other democratic partners can do is to ensure that every time when there is a court trial that they show up and go listen, because that tells the prisoner themselves and also the people on the ground that we haven't forgotten them and we're paying attention, we're watching, we're observing, we're documenting, and we will be ready to take actions when it's needed. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we will open it up to the audience for any sort of questions. Yes. Oh, sorry, can you wait? I also should say this. Everybody wait for the microphone. We have lovely staff. Thank you, Talia. And please state your name, where you're from, and just a question.
My name is Barbara. I'm from New York. I weigh 89 pounds. I used to weigh 89 pounds. And although now I'm healthier, the scars are still there. I'm sitting on a boatload of suffering, my own and those near to me. I was handled. I was told I was strong, proud. I had to repent for my sins using religion against to become a heroine, or to be a heroine and climb on the cross like Jesus. My question is, in America, does America, are we doing the same thing to our helpers? Do NGOs, US military, or to protect intelligence sources, do good guys ever use American citizens for negotiation for military purposes, or as I said, to protect intelligence? I am alive today because I walked through heroin and lived. I figured it out.
Does anybody want to address any of that? Or I'm sorry for your suffering and that you went through really hard and difficult times. I know for those of us who are up here, we're really trying to advocate for freedom so that those who are suffering behind bars don't have to go through really horrible things. And
the question is, do we in the military use the same methods? Or in NGOs? Or in other words, do we use that kind of thing to negotiate, to meet vicious regimes?
I mean, in the US, we do not take political prisoners. It's one of the things that really separates the US, the ability to have the rule of law. Francis was even talking about the importance of the rule of law in the Hong Kong context and how when you undermine the rule of law, it has so many downstream effects. So I feel very confident in saying that our court system is strong and has a lot of vitality. And so, yeah, thank you so much for your question. Are there other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Emily Helscher, and my question is, I know social media is a very important tool for political prisoner advocacy, but oftentimes these government and regime trolls from China, Venezuela, Russia, and other countries try to drown out or remove content advocating for political prisoners. Are there more effective ways that we could show those inside autocracies that we're standing with them? And another question is, can we do a cross-cultural solidarity with all the political prisoners globally? Together, like we could collaborate with like Hong Kong, the Uyghurs, and Belarus, Cuba, and other dictatorships, help the democracy activists in the dictatorships.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. I think that's such a great question. Would anybody like to take that, or should I take it a first stab?
From the limited now experience I have, I've reached out to some folks within our intelligence community and other areas and asked them, what are the Chinese officials reading? What impacts them? The answers I've gotten back surprised me, but that's where I'm going to put our material. So yes, Instagram and Twitter or X, whatever it's called. Sorry, I'm old. To me, it's Twitter. That's all great, but I want to put Ziba's content about her mother and the content about these families, right? I want to put it right in the place that I know CCP officials are reading and the thing that impacts them, right? And so I think it's important for all of these regimes for us to do our homework and our research, figure out, is it Instagram and X, or is it, you know, the Washington Times? And if it's that, focus on that.
Also adding to your to Sarah's answer, I think the Chinese government or like those dictators are not the only audiences we're trying to reach to, but also the people who are still trapped in that country, who might not be in prison, but their freedom is still, you know, restricted. For example, platforms like Instagram, X, and Snapchat, TikTok, they're all banned in China. Searching engines like Google is banned in China. And people in, majority of the population in China are very less likely to read the New York Times, very less likely to read Washington Post because the firewall. However, there are different ways for us to get the message to them that the people here do care, that we're working on this. I know one way that the Uyghur community had tried really hard to get, you know, the voices or the messages out was through Clubhouse. Last couple of years, Clubhouse is something that does not use your face. You do not have to disclose your name. However, you could like live record your voice messages, and it could be used. And many I've joined a few of those Clubhouse, what is it called, like room sessions? Yes, I'm not very good with like technologies, but I thought it was really interesting to me, and it was my first time being able to reconnect with people still are in China, and for them it was their first time. Even though for me it has been 12 years advocating for, you know, the stop of human rights violations, but for a lot of those people, it was their very first time to even learn about human rights violations in their own country that they're living in. So I think not only we want to reach the audience, the Chinese government to be our audience, but we also want the people who are still living in China or elsewhere around the world to be able to hear us, that we do care and we are fighting for them and we're fighting for our loved ones, and we would like for them to work with us. And I think whether it's the white paper movement or you know, different protests that there were protest outbreaks in China, I really do believe it was because of those glimpses of information that's been you know, spread to them throughout the course of, you know, the past 10, 20 years. And people are slowly getting information from here and there, even though it's very much restricted, the source of information. So yeah, I do believe, yeah, you know, we could try our best to diversify our way of communicating with whoever is involved, whether it is the Chinese government or the people who are still trapped there. So that's for your first question. The second question, I have luckily been able to given the opportunity to speak on the stage of Oslo Freedom Forum, which is hosted by Human Rights Foundation. They gather annually where they invite people from all around the world, human rights defenders from all around the world. And they meet either in Norway or Taiwan, in New York. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for human rights defenders from different, you know, causes to meet and to learn from each other. I've learned from who was a previous political prisoner from El Salvador. He is now teaching at George Washington University. He was released because of his wife and his daughter's advocacy for many years. And looking at his case gives me hope. And I watched the video of him getting picked up at Dulles International Airport by his wife and his daughter. Every time watching that video gives me hope. Makes me cry. never stops crying every time I watch it. However, it gives me hope. That makes me believe that one day I will be able to get to film that. Oh, getting emotional again. I will be able to film a video like that with me reuniting with my father. And I really do believe in cross-cultural, you know, solidarity work. And I'm constantly working with the Hong Kong community, Tibetan community, Rohingya community as well. I think it's incredibly important. The Uyghur advocacy work is very young, like the whole advocacy community. We're very young. We're one of the newest advocacy communities. We've been learning from everyone, and it's just it's refreshing, and also we admire all the our teachers from different movements, and I think it's beautiful that when we can share those experiences and can fight along each other. Yeah.
And I just wanted to add too on like thinking through different mediums for delivering our message. This is one of the reasons why I'm concerned about the future of Radio Free Asia. We were able to take a lot of the work and the messaging and all of the hope that we had and convey that through Radio Free Asia. Radio Free Asia also was able to give us information about political prisoners so that we were more educated in how we were advocating. And so even some of the older forms, not social media, but some of the older forms of communication, including radio, are incredibly, incredibly helpful, especially to communities that are behind iron curtains, great firewalls, et cetera. And so I'm really grateful that you asked that question. And then I also loved your second question because I think that it is great to think about how do we expand, even across China, we're missing a Tibetan, we're missing Falun Gong, we're missing like a dissident from this stage. But beyond that, if we could have, folks from North Korea, folks from
Iran.
Everywhere, like all across the globe, I think it would be great. So maybe that's a good idea for a future thing that Hudson can engage on. So thanks so much, Emily, for that. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions if there's any other questions, and if not,
Can I address that too?
oh yeah. Sorry, Francis.
I wanted to add on the radio part. Not only the people on the ground, in China can listen to it. Actually, political prisoners, they're also listening to radio. I'm not sure about the situation in Chinese prison, but in Hong Kong, prisoners can have radio. And something that they can tune in when they have free time out of their work, their labor time. And so, they can also see TV in the common area, but that's more difficult. I think radio is a great point that sometimes we can send things up to the air and, share our message. If it's like a song or like a message or even a piece of news about how we are supporting them would really help to, keep their morale and their spirits high. To your second question, I think what Jur said is already kind of like articulated it really well. I think 5 years ago, before I started my activism, Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, and Tibetans were kind of not working together, right? We're kind of in our own movement, figuring out ourselves. And then in 2019, when the Hong Kong movement happened, I think we started to see more collaborations between these communities, because we're all kind of under the oppression of the same regime. And now I think we look beyond that, how we as a coalition can also work with other people who are suffering under other authoritarian regimes. And I'm in full support in any way we can coordinate with other countries. And I think that's what the new office can do, right? Like they have access and connections with families and communities from different countries. And what they can do is to put them together and really have a coordinated and concerted efforts for political prisoners. Like we all said, this is not just for China, right? The authoritarian allyship is watching. The alliance is watching what we are going to do to counter their authoritarian efforts. So this is not just a message to the CCP, it's to everyone who is holding political prisoners in their countries and limiting their freedom and to use that prison system to control and isolate dissent.
That's such a good point. Like, even though I wrote the paper that you all can grab on your way out in the China context, because that's what I know, an office for political prisoner advocacy is for everyone, like every single person. So I really appreciate you, broadening the answer to the overall community, because I do think that really clearly convey that America stands on the side of freedom. We stand on the side of setting political prisoners free. And if that's something that's of interest, I think, yeah, it would be so good and so helpful to those in the other communities.
Olivia,
Oh,
can I
yeah.
just add to that too. I had a former role years back as a coalitions director as well. And from that perspective, as like the government person who's, a government staffer's job, whose job it is to bring people in, the larger the coalition, right, with different voices that represent different people, the more effective you can be, rather than, you know, you have this small group and this group and this group. And if you can come in as one voice, all representing your own communities, I think that could be really beneficial to help move the needle from the government perspective, right? So I just thought about that as you were saying that. I think that would have been, I'm so glad that all of the communities now are starting to work together, right? Because it was sometimes difficult to get them all, you know, and hear from everybody.
Yeah.
I'd love to add one thing there too.
Yeah.
Along with coalition building, in terms of all the groups getting together and advocating with one another, I think one opportunity to pursue also is multilateralizing. And so it's not just a U.S. Problem, right? I mean, I think we can help, but I think that we need allies. And I just took a trip earlier in March to Berlin. I met with several folks in government in Berlin, also went to the UN, went to Geneva, met with some of their special working groups and some of the missions there. And so I think it's really important, not only do we form coalitions together for political prisoners, but also form coalitions in government. Sometimes it can be more effective for the Germans or the Czechs or others to reach out than the Americans, or for us to reach out together, depending on the political winds. And so I think that we should all consider not just, you know, coming together in terms of who we support and represent, but thinking creatively, like IRFBA and other organizations that exist. Multiple nations have said, we care about these issues together. One of my ideas would be, I mean, others have had it before me, Sam Brownback is the one that really originated this, but that we could actually do things more effectively together. So if there's a political prisoner and we had multiple nations that together could say, look, this is a problem and we're gonna do this about it, I think that would speak volumes. I mean, a lot more. I mean, I think I support using social media, but I mean, a lot more than a tweet or an X or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's going to be more important for multiple politicians to reach out at the same time. So I think we could do that. I think that would be effective. And if we had someone in an office like you've described, I think that would help us, from our standpoint as the United States, be able to leverage that more effectively. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you to everybody so much for joining us today. Before we clap for everybody, I did want to say we have lunch available outside. Many thanks to Talia and our events team for pulling all of that together. So please grab lunch as you're on your way out, and we look forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you for joining us here at Hudson today, and please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.
Good job, ladies.